Okay, now can you share that slide again? I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, if you want to start letting people in.
All right, here they come.
Ready as I'll ever be. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is almost.
Hey, everybody.
Yes. Welcome to Wit, Wisdom, and Wine. Just a few housekeeping items as people are coming on in. If you want to just make sure that your microphone is on mute. We'll be, basically today's session is going to be a conversation between CH Armstrong, known as Kathy, and I. So feel free if, as we're talking, if you have a question that you want to ask. One of the reasons why this one, I was like, we're going to do this for Wit, Wisdom, and Wine, is not only is Kathy a local author, she's also a literary agent. So this is a great session for people who are readers and people who may be aspiring writers. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it into the chat. And then if you have technical difficulties, ping us in the chat. We'll help you if we're able. Luckily, so far, knock on wood, we have not had any problems. Although now that I've said that, it's, I just myself, that's all right.
I'm just going to correct Shelley really quickly. There's no such thing as an aspiring writer. If you were writing, you are a writer. You are no longer aspiring.
Fantastic. Thank you. That is awesome.
And there we start our session. So
all right, I'll stop. Thank you. On that note, I will stop sharing my screen if you want to go ahead and show the video, Brenda.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Brenda Kardak. I'm the Executive Director of the Rochester Public Library Foundation. And welcome to our session. To make my rambling short, we're going to go to a short video so that you can see more about the Rochester Public Library Foundation. And then we will get right into the session because that's what you came to see. You want to hear CH talk instead of me. So here we go.
Rochester Public Library Foundation was formed in 1996 in an effort to raise private funds for the library and ensure its continued success and achievements.
The foundation supports initiatives, often creating the only opportunity for pilot projects and incentives for community feedback.
In past years, we have helped launch the Wi-Fi hotspot program, providing connectivity in homes that have no internet.
Rochester Reading Champions, which pairs tutors with struggling readers to achieve results.
And last year, patrons joined in the commitment to help the library go fine-free, to help remove barriers to accessing the library's resources.
We are proud of the positive impact these programs have had on our community.
Tutors remark on the joy it brings them to see the confidence and pride on their students' faces as they master skills they had all but given up on.
Our neighbors are able to apply for jobs and video chat with relatives as they keep social distance in their homes using our hotspots.
Materials are being checked out in large quantities and picked up through touchless delivery in the Mayo Civic Center ramp and the library's newly installed walk-up windows.
But we still do not have all the resources we need to help all those who could benefit from tutoring.
The hotspots continue to have a wait list.
And we continue to investigate ways we can grow our service to our community, especially as we are facing greater challenges this year than ever before.
Thank you for supporting the library and foundation. The kindness of people like you means so much and allows our community to flourish.
Thank you for sharing our belief in the importance of information, books, materials, and resources.
Giving everyone equal access to learn, grow, and thrive is at the center of everything we do.
If you would like to pitch in to help us in our efforts, please go to our website. And thank you for your support.
Shell, you can introduce Kathy if you are ready.
I am, thank you. All right, welcome again, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. As I mentioned before, this is going to be a conversation basically between Kathy Armstrong and I. So there's not going to be a PowerPoint. I think if you hit speaker view, that'll bring both of us up at the same time. But whatever works. Oh, thank you, Brenda. All right. Kathy Armstrong is an Oklahoma transplant who has called Rochester home for almost 30 years. Although her first book, called The Edge of Nowhere, was inspired by family stories she heard while growing up, her second novel, Rome, was inspired by the homeless community here in Rochester. A fun fact about C.H. Armstrong is that her favorite novel is To Kill a Mockingbird. Rome pays homage to this classic through its central theme of understanding the people and world around you by trying to understand the world through the lens and experience of others. And if you haven't had a chance to read Rome and are new to this world that Kathy has created, even though it's basically in our backyard, never fear, we are going to start things off today by playing the book trailer that was created for her book. So Grace, if you could go ahead and roll that video.
I remember when I used to love winter and everything with it. The cold, crisp air, the fluffy white snow, building snowmen with my little sister. Winter meant the beginning of hockey season. Snow skiing, ice skating on frozen ponds. And maybe my favorite part was waking up on a cold morning and finding school unexpectedly canceled. But that was before. Now I hate everything about winter, because when you're homeless, winter isn't pretty or fun. And when your home is in the back of your mom's van, winter means the kind of cold that hurts, especially in Minnesota. It wasn't always like this. 6 months ago, we were a normal family. My biggest worry back then was what my best friends and I would do that weekend. But then Mom had to go and screw everything up. Now we've moved to a new town in a new state where you're either super rich or really poor, like us. There's no way my new rich friends would ever understand just how poor we are. So I guard all my secrets with my life. But secrets never stay that way, and the whole world is about to find mine out.
Kathy, I think when we first started talking about how we envisioned what this session was going to be and what it would entail, I do believe you have a brief reading for us. Rome?
I do, absolutely. And I just want to point out the video was made right before the book's release, which was about a year ago. So the book is out. You don't have to wait till February if it's something that you're interested in. I was going to read just a short passage from Rome, and I wanted to kind of set it up so you kind of get an idea of what's going on. So to give you a little bit of background, you understand that Abby is the main character, and she is homeless with her family. It's her mother and her stepfather and her younger sister, Amber. And the family's gone through some trials. They've started out in their van, and then for a while they got to live in a homeless shelter, but it was for a short period of time. Actually, in the book, it's the Dorothy Day House. But if anybody knows anything about the Dorothy Day House, they do have a short period of time. You can only stay there for 2 weeks. So they've run out their 2 weeks, and now they're back in the van again. We're looking at like mid-November, December time period. So it's getting really cold outside. When I was writing it, I was thinking about my first winter here in November at Thanksgiving was 8 degrees outside. And as a new person in Minnesota, it was so cold, it physically hurt. And I was wearing long underwear, and it was horrible. And so that's what I was thinking about when I wrote it. So the flu season's going on right now, and one of her new friends from school has asthma and has gotten the flu, which has put him in the hospital. So that kind of makes her, starts her thinking about what would happen with her family. So that's a little bit of a setup. And that friend in particular, his name is mentioned in this passage, and his name is Josh. And I'm really old, so I got to put my glasses on. I turned 50 this year. So they're in the van. And to set it up again, the little sister's name is Amber, and the main character is Abby. And then Nick is her stepfather. Mom runs her hands over Abby's forehead and studies her fever-dulled eyes. We've spent 4 nights back in the van, and each has left us more exhausted than the last. And now Amber's sick. What do we do? Mom looks at Nick. She can't go to school. Well, I'll stay with her, I offer. Mom and Nick argue silently with their eyes, their frustration louder than words. Come on, I say. What other choice do we have? If one of you stays, you'll lose your job, and we need that money. I won't miss much at school, and you'll be back early enough for me to do the paper route. They stare at each other another moment, and Nick shrugs as if to say, fine, whatever. Mom blows out of breath. I don't like it either, Nick, but what other choice do we have? You're right. We don't have a choice, he says, then mumbles under his breath. We never have choices these days. Tears glisten in Mom's eyes, but she turns to me and pulls a smile across her face. Will you be okay, Abs? Jeez, Mom, I retort, aggravated she asked after everything we've been through. I've grown up, I have a job. I've been looking after Amber every day since we got here, and I'm just as capable of taking care of this family as you are. Mom's head snaps back as though I've slapped her. Dang it, I've been so good at checking my temper. Straightening her shoulders, Mom shoots Nick one last look. He nods, then she kisses Amber's forehead and snugs the blankets around her. We'll get home early if we can. Home? Who does she think she's kidding? Just when you think things can't get worse, they do. Until now, I'd thought sleeping in the van at night was as bad as things could get. Oh, how wrong I was. Being stuck in the van all day is worse. Last night's temperatures dropped into the single digits, and it's barely warmed up since. My fingers are red and stiff from the cold, and bending them is painful. My nose is a block of ice, and my lips are so numb I can't even enunciate my words. It seems only yesterday when watching the vapor from my breath was fun, but this isn't fun at all. Beside me, Amber's face is flushed, but she vibrates with shivers. I've wrapped my body as tightly around her as I can, but it's not enough. Somehow I have to warm her up. My eyes scan inside the van, searching for anything to provide extra warmth, but there's nothing. And then my attention lands on Mom's keys. She left them in the cup holder between the driver and the passenger seats, reminding me, for an emergency. I study them as my mind races through the pros and cons of heating the van. Coming to a decision, I pull away from Amber and reach for the keys. Sister. Amber's lashes flutter and she gazes at me through fever-glazed eyes. Please don't go. I'm so cold. Shh. I wrap my discarded blankets over her, then run my palm along her forehead and down her cheek. I'm just going to warm the van up for a few minutes, okay? Amber closes her eyes and nods. Careful not to disturb her further, I climb over the center console and squeeze into the driver's seat. I blow out another puff of hot, white air into my hands, then slide the key into the ignition and start the van. Frigid air blows from the vents, and I turn the knob as hot as it will go. A cold shiver rushes through me. I flip the fan to high, then crawl over the console and under the blankets with Amber. It's so cold, she whines. I know, it'll warm up in a minute. On the back of the center console above our heads is an air vent. Somehow I have to trap that heat. Amber, let me have this top blanket, I say, tugging at the bedspread I've tucked around her. Freeing the blanket, I cover the air vent and drape the ends through the armrests on the 2 front seats. I look around for a way to secure the bottom, but my options are limited. With no other choices, I crack the wing windows just enough to slide a piece of fabric through, then close them once again. The effect is a fort that hangs about 8 inches above our heads, trapping the heat under the blanket. After about 15 minutes, I turn off the ignition. The van is toasty warm, and it's even warmer under our fort. But I know it won't last. I slide back under my makeshift tent and wrap my body around Amber's. Thank you, she says, closing her eyes as sleep claims her. I kiss her forehead and regard her tiny face, her cute upturned nose, and the long eyelashes that hide her brilliant blue eyes. She lets out a long rattling cough, then settles down until all I can hear is a faint wheeze each time she breathes in. The sound terrifies me. It's too much like the sound Josh made in the hospital when he was hooked up to those machines. What if Amber needs to go to the hospital? We don't have the money to pay for the emergency room. Would they turn her away? And if they did, would she die? A million truly scary scenarios race through my mind, each one worse than the last. I'm startled back to reality when a tear splashes onto the pillow beside Amber's head. I don't want to be a grown-up anymore. Another tear escapes and I lay my head next to my baby sister's. Please let me wake up and discover this has all been a dream. So that's a parent's worst scenario. When I was writing that, I kept thinking about my own children. To give you a little bit of an idea what that means is Amber and Abby and Amber, Abby being the oldest and Amber being the youngest, are about 9 years apart, just as my children are 9 years apart. And just like Abby is kind of an extra mother figure to Amber, so too is my daughter to my son, who's 9 years younger. So if you have kids that are spread apart like that, they take on a lot of, maybe not deliberately, but they take on a parental role in many ways with their younger siblings. And that's kind of what's happened with Abby, is she's become a third parent to Amber.
Well, there's a comment, such tough choices, who can imagine making these kinds of choices? Now, when we first started, right before you started reading, you mentioned, thinking back to your first winter here in Rochester, long under 8 degrees. What brought you, and you're originally from Oklahoma. What brought you here?
So it's actually kind of a funny story, but I'll just abbreviate it. My husband is very headstrong and decides what he's going to do, and then he makes it happen. And so my husband and I both graduated from the University of Oklahoma, and he's always wanted to do computer things since he was tiny, when computers were effectively invented, if you know what I mean. And he had decided when he was about in 3rd or 4th grade that he wanted to work for IBM. And long story short, he had gotten a couple of rejections from IBM, right after college. And I kept asking him, are you gonna, send that resume out now? You've been turned down from IBM. And he'd actually been on site for a visit and everything, and then they'd still turned him down. And he said he wouldn't even send a resume. He sent one resume out, and they offered him a job in Kansas City, and he turned it down because he was insulted by what they offered him for pay. And so this is becoming a very contentious thing, and we're getting married in October. He still doesn't have a job, and I'm still saying, are you going to send out a job application somewhere? No, I'm going to work for IBM. And that's all he kept saying, I'm going to work for IBM. And so I'm not a happy camper. So our wedding day comes, which is in October of 92. We get married, we say I do, we're at the reception, and my husband comes to me and he says, can we talk just away from this for just a couple minutes? I'm like, okay, sure. So we step out into a hallway, and he says, I'm going to work for IBM. And I freak out. I'm furious. I'm like, Troy, not today. I cannot believe you are starting. And I'm furious. It's my wedding day. He goes, no, I'm serious. Like, they called me this morning. They offered me a job this morning. And I'm like, what? He's like, yes. Now I just need you to say okay. And I'm like, okay, well, where? And he's like, Minnesota. And I'm like, I didn't even know where Minnesota was. But he said, it's just for 3 years, honey. It'll be okay. It's a term employee just for 3 years. And I was like, okay, because I come from this huge family, and so family's really important to me. And I'm like, okay, I can do 3 years. It was 28 years December. My kids both have Minnesota accents. And and it's cold. I mean, compared to Oklahoma, this is like Siberia, So that's I did condense it. That's but that's the story. Is my husband's job at IBM.
Well, but what is so funny? So as I mentioned before, there are 2 books, The Edge of Nowhere and then Rome, and both of them are so rooted in home for you in terms of The Edge of Nowhere is a book that is based on stories that you heard growing up about your grandmother. And then Rome Can you just tell the audience a little bit, what inspired you to write Rome?
Oh gosh, so I can't remember what, I think it was 2014. I was writing articles just on an assignment by assignment basis for Rochester Women Magazine back when Jory Johnson owned it. And she had assigned me to go and write about this soup kitchen here in Rochester that was at the Christ United Methodist Church. And the lady who was running this soup kitchen, it was called the Saturday Noon Meals. She had been doing it almost by herself for, I can't remember if it was 20 or 25 years. So it was a feature article about this woman and what she was doing. And I didn't want to do it. I mean, it sounds so, and the reason I didn't want to do it is because I didn't know how to behave in terms of, I didn't know how to dress, what to say. I knew I was going to be meeting homeless people in the community. And the big thing was, how do you dress? Well, you don't dress up because then you look like you're, putting on airs, and you don't dress down because that's not respectful to them. So anyway, all these things went through my mind, and I didn't know what I was going to say. And so I met with this woman, and almost immediately from walking through the doors into that Saturday Noon Meals, it was life altering. In fact, there's a chapter in the book where Abby goes to a soup kitchen like the Saturday Noon Meals, and she meets a character like it was Linda. Oh my gosh, in the book I called her Linda Cummings, but it was Linda. I can't remember her last name off the top of my head all of a sudden, but she had been running this soup kitchen for years and years. So the character meets a woman like that. Curtis? Thank you, Linda Curtis, which I'm embarrassed that I can't remember that because she made such a huge impact on me. Thank you. So Linda Curtis, and unfortunately she's passed away since then. But I remember going in there and seeing how this place was not what I expected. It was this community of people that most of them knew each other, and if they didn't know each other, they pulled you in very, very closely. So there's a chapter in the book where Abby and her family goes to this similar soup kitchen, and Abby's experience that day is almost identical to my experience when I went to this soup kitchen and the people that she met. It was truly life altering. And I did tell Mrs. Curtis that I was writing this book because I'd gone back several times after that. And she was so excited. I never told her that I got a contract on it because my thought process was I was going to surprise her. I really wanted to surprise her and show her the book, give her a copy of the book in her hand. And when I finally got a copy of the book, I tried to get a hold of her through email, which is how we often communicated, and she never responded. And so after several weeks of her not responding, I called the church and I said, is something going on because she doesn't respond to my emails? And I was told that she'd literally just passed away within a week of my contacting them. And I never got a chance to show her the book. And that was, for me, that was heartbreaking. It taught me something though. I mean, it taught me that you grasp those moments. You don't wait in anticipation of something better. You do it right then. Because I never got a chance to tell her. And that's probably my biggest regret, is not having a chance to actually let her hold a copy of the book, or not even not hold it, just know that it existed. I could have sent her, an advance of it or something.
Well, it's through our conversations, leading up to this event, and, in reading, the stuff that you have on your website, and, again, just us talking back and forth, there is, again, so much community. I wouldn't be surprised if there are folks in this audience who, know some of the landmarks and, this program that you're speaking of, Linda Curtis. And when I was reading Rome, hold on a second. Technology, as y'all know, it scares me. It was so funny because I was reading Rome in preparation for this event for the Rochester Public Library Foundation, and I came across this. The Rochester Public Library is surprisingly busy, with a steady stream of people going in and out its doors. It's larger than expected, and I gape at its size. It might be similar in size to our local library in Omaha, but the high ceilings and glass windows around the front side make it feel cavernous. On the main floor, between the front desk and the children's section, are 2 rooms located side by side. The first is enclosed in glass walls and features a bank of computers nestled between private carrels. The sign above the door glows with neon letters reading teens. And I'm just reading it, and I'm like, oh, I just walked into that building. This feels like such a love letter to the Rochester community. And I know, and again, one of the things that I've loved hearing about from you is the reception that you've gotten from local readers, especially when you've brought it to schools. Can you tell us a little bit about, some of those stories?
Yeah, one of the things that I guess I should have anticipated and didn't really understand fully enough when I wrote the book was how many homeless teens we have in Rochester. And I'm still shocked when I think about it. So when the book was launched, one of the things that I did was I did a book tour of a couple of the high schools, but mostly I focused on the middle schools because they had more time in their schedules and things like that. And almost every class I went to, and I went by class by class by class. So we weren't, we weren't doing a lot at one time. We were just doing one classroom at a time in Rochester. Almost every classroom I had at least one student that was homeless or had been homeless or who knew someone homeless. At one point I got this one classroom sent me these wonderful thank you notes. And I had this note from this one young lady, and it just, I kept all the notes, but this one was especially special to me because she said she felt like the book was written for her. And the reason why is because, and she was only 6th grade, she had experienced homelessness. I guess her mom had been without jobs and things. And so she and her mom were floating from couch to couch to couch in different people's houses until her former stepfather just decided to adopt her. After he was already her former stepfather. So he had basically stepped in and said, okay, this kid can't live like this anymore. And he adopted her. So she's now out of the homeless community, but her mom is still in the homeless community. And she had shared the story with her mom. And then it was so sweet. She said, I want to buy a copy of this for my mom, or something along those lines. My mom really needs this book. And I shared the information with my publisher, and my publisher said, that child and her mother both need a book, and I want you to put one in their hands. And she paid for it to make sure that the child and the mother both had copies of that book. I have an awesome publisher. My publisher is just absolutely cream of the crop. If I could publish everything through her, I would.
Well, and I love your covers are just fantastic. I do have.
Yes.
Very understated, but fantastic. So if you were casting a movie, again, this is the high school crowd. When you were writing this, did you have any particular actors in mind as you were writing this?
Well, for Nick especially, Nick's character, as I'm writing it, I kept thinking about Justin Baldoni. I don't know if you guys know who that is, but he starred in Jane the Virgin. And I love how he brings the character to life. And I've kind of followed him. So I don't know him personally or anything, but I followed him and kind of figured out who he is as a person. And that I would love to have him play the part of Nick if that were to be the case. The girl I actually molded the character of Abby on was from Riverdale, believe it or not. I wish I could remember her name, but she's got long red hair in Riverdale.
Oh, Madeline Pesh.
Madeline Pesh, yes, thank you. And I love her, and I found a picture of her, and she's got this great, wonderful curly hair in this one picture, and I was like, that is Abby. And so the whole time I'm writing Abby, that's who I imagined. The mother for Abby is actually too old to play the part, I think, and I can't think of her name, but she was in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. The mom, the redhead.
Rebecca De Mornay?
Not Rebecca De Mornay, but the other one. I can't think of her name.
If anybody knows, just drop that in the chat. You didn't know that we were going to have a trivia section to this talk.
So she was also, actually, a little secret about her, she was on a soap opera back in the early 80s too. But red hair, freckles, she was also in, I think, Silence of the Lambs. But I can't
Annabelle.
No. I'll think about it. I can't think of her name.
This is gonna, what's gonna happen is you're gonna go to bed.
Julianne Moore.
Julianne Moore. Okay.
Yes.
2 a.m. you were gonna wake up.
Julianne Moore. She's a little old for the part, especially.
I love her.
Yeah, that's who I was imagining as the mom, even though she's too old for the part. If you cast Justin Baldoni as the husband, she's quite the cradle robber in that one. But so, in terms of the other characters, interestingly enough, the other characters were not based upon anybody famous, but they were all inspired by people that I knew for the most part. So Abby and Amber were both inspired by my daughter. So Abby being my daughter at 17, and Amber being my daughter at 6. And actually, there's a scene in the book which actually was taken from real life. Amber is quite precocious. In fact, I turned down a book publishing contract on this before I actually found my publisher, because they wanted to dumb down the 6-year-old, and I didn't want them to do that. They said, no 6-year-old behaves or talks like this. Oh yeah, they do. Oh yeah, they do. It was my 6-year-old. But she's very precocious, and she's talking to her sister about her sister's going out on her first real date, if you will. And she says, are you going to kiss him? And her sister's like, oh my God, I don't want to talk about this. This is none of your business. And the little sister says, are you going to French kiss him? And she's really freaking out that her little sister's talking about this. And the next thing you know, the little sister says, well, I know how to French kiss. And so, you know how with little kids, you kind of ignore them when they're talking about things you don't want to talk about, because if you ignore them, they'll go away. They'll stop talking about it or whatever.
You think, at least.
You know, at least in theory. So everybody's trying to ignore Amber in this scene. And the next thing they look around, Amber's face is just covered in all this slobber. It's just all over. She's blowing bubbles with it. And Abby turns to her sister. She goes, oh my God, what are you doing? That's disgusting. Wipe your face. And she goes, I'm showing you how the French do it. And she's like, what? The French, how they do it. And everybody's like, what are you talking about? How the French do what? And she says, how the French kiss. This is, you know, so that was actually taken from real life. My daughter, when she was 6, had come to me with the same story. And I described this. I mean, it was disgusting. It was just like slobber, blowing bubbles, you know. So that was a story. So the characters are in a lot of ways inspired by real people. The main Zach is the main heartthrob in the story, and Zach was inspired by 2 young men from Mayo High School. Both were good friends of my daughter. One was her ex-boyfriend. Corey Walk was her boyfriend at the time, and the other was just a really good friend, Johnny Rojas. And so I know, I see Grace going, oh my gosh, I know Johnny. When I was sitting here writing this book, I was using them because they were really the only teenage boys I knew at the time, and I was using them how I thought they would react. And I really feel like that's how they would have reacted in real life to this situation. Grace says she went to elementary school with both of them, and they're both great kids. I keep in touch with Corey still, and I haven't talked to Johnny in a long time, but I talked to his mom still. She's a teacher here in the district. So, yes, and Grace.
And you would get this a lot too when you were out. Like, people would recognize like siblings or cousins, because I remember you telling me that story that early on that some kid came up to you and was like, was this one based on so and so? And you know, I know a lot of writers who are like, they're like, oh no, you know, we you know, I don't want, you know, these people to think that they were the influence of my characters, but what flattering. I mean, it's just so neat that they saw that, and that's really resonated with your readers.
Well, and that's the thing is, you know, I hear that a lot too from other authors. They say, you know, were any of your characters inspired by real life people? And they don't want to admit to that. And maybe they don't, maybe they're not. But most of my characters are somehow inspired, because I have to write about what I know. And I would never tell you who some of the characters are inspired by if they're not fun, if they're not good characters. But if they're really positive characters, why not? You know, I guess for me, I just feel like it's important, you know, talking about characters that were inspired. Mrs. Minor is a character in this book, and I wish I had remembered this ahead of time. I wish I could show you a picture of her. There is a real Mrs. Minor in real life. When I was in high school, I had the most incredible music teacher. I wasn't into music per se, but we were required to take music classes. And she was this incredible Black woman who, and I specifically point out the fact she was Black, because after I wrote the book and I talked to her and got her okay to use her name, she wrote a letter to the editor of my hometown newspaper, wherein she actually said, imagine what her life had been like. We're going into Black History Month coming up next week. When she started teaching in my school district, my hometown school district, we had desegregation, but Black teachers were not qualified to teach white students. And so my high school was one of the first high schools in the entire area. And that's why a lot of teachers from Oklahoma went to Texas, because they couldn't get jobs in Oklahoma. And she's one of the first African-American teachers to teach at the El Reno Public Schools as a Black teacher in a white school. And so she wrote this letter to the editor, and she says, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you and I would not have this relationship because it wouldn't have been allowed in Oklahoma. I mean, I don't know what it was like here in the North, but in Oklahoma, it wouldn't have been allowed. But she made such a huge impact on my life. And I think, what would my life have been like without this particular woman who wasn't allowed to teach in the high schools, even 5 or 10 years before I got, about even 10 years before I got there, And she really, so anyway, she's lovely, and she came to my book signing when I went to Oklahoma, and I got pictures of her, and I just still adore her.
Well, and so now Rome is out there in the world, and it was that released, was it February 2019?
No, it's February last year.
Okay.
Oh, wait, no, wait. No, you're right, it was.
In 2020, if we want to forget it.
I feel like 2020 just, it wasn't even a thing.
Well,
it was 19.
And so not to give anything away, but this story does have, the happily ever after, things end up good. But, this book was released in 2019. If Abby and Zach and Josh and that whole wonderful crew of friends that she had, if they were real people, they would be in college right now.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that Abby and Zach would be still together? And what is, I love playing this game with like those favorite characters, like, what is their future? And what about her friend Josh? I recognized so many of my friends in Josh in terms of just that great platonic, guy friend who just helps you understand the world, basically. But, where do you think some of your characters would be now? Again, it's 2021. We've been through a pandemic. I know if they were college students, life would be really different. So what do you think?
Well, so I've thought about this, and no, I don't think that Zach and Abby would still be together, only because most high school relationships sort of, not all of them, and some of them are very, very successful, but they grow and they move on. But I do think they would remain really good friends. And I think that would be a bond that they would have even as they went to the same the same college. So I think they would still know each other, and they would still be good friends, and they would probably even run with the same groups in college, but I don't think they would still be a couple necessarily. I've thought about this a few times. I really see Josh as, I've thought about writing another book, and I just don't know what I would do with it, to go with it. But in my mind, I see them continuing communication with Josh and with the two girls, just through phone calls. If I was going to write another book with Abby being at the center of it, they would be involved in the form of phone calls, and maybe they'd come for a surprise visit. As by the way, in real life, the two that inspired Zach, have kept in touch with my daughter over the years, and so I just think that I one of the things I've heard some readers say, and they don't necessarily like that I ended it on a nice little tight little bow and everybody's happy, and they felt that some people feel that that's just not a realistic ending to it, and that may or may not be true. I did that deliberately. I deliberately had a good ending to it, because I think when you're writing young adult stories, first of all, you want to write to what some of them are experiencing, but also give them hope. And if you end the story where everything's just an awful, everything ends and it's all bad, well, then what hope are we giving to these kids? So, and that's why I deliberately ended it on a hopeful note, so that if there was a kid, and it sounds like there were kids that have read this. I actually had a father come when I was in St. Cloud, because I had presented at one of the St. Cloud high schools, middle schools maybe it was, and a father came and brought his daughter because he'd heard about it, and we sat for a long time. He was a veteran and talked about how he had been homeless for a period of time. And so that was being the daughter and the sister of veterans, that was really important to me, that he was moved by the idea that there was a book on that subject that his daughter could relate to.
Somebody had left a comment after you were talking about your story with your Mrs. Minor. Just loved that story and how diversity enhances us.
It really does.
Absolutely. So, we were, when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned that, yes, that there have, a lot of these characters that are in Rome have been influenced by real people who are in your life. One of our very first conversations, and I jotted this down because I thought it was so cool, you told me about some of the Easter eggs that you left in Rome.
Yes.
So
Yes.
first, you could explain. I learned what an Easter egg was. That it wasn't something that I put in a basket only a couple years ago. So could you explain what an Easter egg is, and then will you tell us what they are? Because again, I think this is just the sweetest thing.
Okay, so an Easter egg is something that is specifically in books, but sometimes you'll see them in movies. An Easter egg is when an author deliberately puts something in the book that certain people will recognize, and they'll go, "Oh, oh, oh, that I get that," or maybe the whole public doesn't get it, but a few people will. I think that Hitchcock is well known for his little Easter eggs of appearing in his own movies. So for me, when I put an Easter egg in a book, I did a lot of Easter eggs in Rome, specifically related to my family. I come from a huge family. I am the fourth of 5 children. I've lost count of how many nieces, great nieces and nephews I have. I have 30 or 40 great nieces and nephews, and most of them are in there right at their teen years. So I got this idea when I was writing. I was sitting there thinking about my nieces and nephews, and now somehow I was thinking about Easter eggs, and I thought, wouldn't it be really cool if this particular niece or nephew was reading this book and her name showed up? So I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. Well, then I thought, I can't just do her. What if so I had to sit down and I had to make a list of every single one of my great nieces and nephews, which was a very, very large list. And I found a way to put their names in this book somewhere, mostly as side characters, like the people at the homeless community, or the people that they talk to at school or pass in the halls or something like that. So what was really kind of amusing to me is, so these are my great nieces and nephews. So my nieces and nephews, specifically my nieces, which were mostly the wives of my nephews, they had this text chain going, and as they're reading their book, they'd circle it in red, and then they'd snap a picture of it, and then they'd send it to the other sisters-in-law when they would spot one of the kids' names. And it was pretty obvious, because some of the names are rather unique, like Nevea and Nikolai and Alexia and Caroline with a K and a Y. So when you get these names in there, it's like, so they knew their names, and so they thought it was really cool to snap. And then somehow I accidentally got in on this. I had no idea they were doing this, and I think they posted it to Facebook or something, but I accidentally got into it. We got to see their stream of text messages, which was so fun to see how excited they were to see their children's names in the books. And then for those kids, and I recently got a picture of my great nephew Nikolai, who's 16, and he was just recently reading it and enjoying it. So.
Well, given what you were just talking about with, all of these family ties, I just want to briefly touch on your first novel, which is called The Edge of Nowhere. Mm-hmm. And so before Rome hit the shelves, you wrote a historical fiction called The Edge of Nowhere, which has been referred to as a refreshing and devastating story about one woman's fight for survival during the Dust Bowl years in Oklahoma. The location of where you set your books, Rochester, Oklahoma, make them personal tales for you. But in this case, Edge of Nowhere is even more personal and loosely based on stories that you grew up hearing about your grandmother and family. Can you tell us a little bit behind what influenced that story? And these stories, by the way, everybody, if you need to go grab yourself some coffee, this is where it's really good. So I never really intended to sit down and write a book, at least not one to be published. That was never on my radar. But years ago, I had this, and she's still a friend, this friend in Rochester who was a writer and had written some books, and we were talking about her book that she'd written, and we got to talking about family things. And to give you a little background about my family, my father was the 8th of 14 children. My grandmother had 5 stepchildren that she raised, and then she had, I think, 8. The rest were hers. Just the rest were hers. And this was during the Dust Bowl. This is during the 1930s. And long story short, my grandmother married a man 20 plus years older than she was, and inherited these 5 children, went on to have another 5 children with him. Anyway, I get them confused. Yeah, another 5 children with him. And then he passed away right as the stock markets
just dropping, they lost their phone, everything, basically they're homeless, if you will. And she at that time had these 10 children. And in the midst of all this, she eventually remarries, but before she remarries, she has 2 more children, which nobody ever, as far as I know, ever made a peep about, which is extremely unusual during the era of the 1930s to have 2 children out of wedlock. She eventually remarries and she has 2 more children. So my dad has a total of 13 siblings, including himself as 14. And my grandmother was this very, very cold woman. She just wasn't warm and fluffy. She wasn't, you didn't go to her house and have cookies. I mean, you went to her house and you behaved yourself or she might whoop you. I mean, that's just the way she was.
And I love how you open. This opens with a letter, and I'll read a little bit of it because it just gives you such a wonderful flavor. But to my grandchildren, I know you refer to me as the meanest woman you've ever known. I've heard you joke behind my back that I'm too mean to die, that even Satan wouldn't have me. This is probably true. I'm not like other grandmothers, and frankly, I have no desire to be. It's just like, from that first line, I'm like, oh, I can't put this down, and I didn't. So.
Well, and in true honesty, those were the first lines I ever wrote for any. I mean, I never changed those opening words, because when I sat down to write this book, I wasn't necessarily writing it to be a book. I wrote it as a cathartic thing, because my grandmother, she was the only grandmother I had. She wasn't loving. She lived 5 miles from me, so I saw her literally 5 or 6 days a week. And I yearned for a grandmother my whole life. And so when I sat down to write this book, the purpose of writing it was just to figure out who she was. Why is she like this? I mean, I lost her when I was in my early 20s, so I knew her my whole life. And now we're 20 years later. So when the first lines of those book was exactly how I felt about my grandmother. She wasn't nice and fluffy. She was mean. We really did joke about it, that she was too damn mean to die, that Satan wouldn't have her. So we sat down to write this book. And as I'm writing this book, I'm pulling in stories that actually happened in real life, and it's mixing with fiction. So it was intended to be true story, but then it mixed with so much fiction that it just became fiction. So that's how the story started. And at one point, I called my cousin who's a doctor, because one of the characters in the book, and I'm not really spoiling anything, one of the characters in the book dies of an appendicitis attack, which my grandfather did. And this cousin of mine my whole family is really close. Well, the 14 children, first cousins once removed and twice and 3 times removed, we're like first cousins. So I call him up. So it's my grandmother, his great grandmother, and I say, can you walk me through an appendicitis attack? He's like, so he's really smart. So he walks me through it, but he's using all this very technical language. I'm like, yeah, okay. Can you just dumb it down for me? Can you just use language that I understand? So he's like, well, what are you doing? And I'm like, so I'm embarrassed, because I had no intention of writing a book, and I don't really want anybody to know. So I say, I'm writing a book. And he's like, what? I said, I'm writing a book. He says, did you say you're writing a book? I said, yeah, I am. He goes, well, what about? And I go, I'm a golden. And he lets out these expletives. He goes, holy bleep. And then he goes, Edna, as in my great grandmother? And I said, yeah. And then more expletives follow. And he goes, oh my God, whatever you do, don't forget to put in blah, 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 blah. And he gives me this huge list of things family stories I have to include in this. And I'm like, okay, I got there. I'm putting it in there, but can you? So it was very personal in that way. And through the writing of this book, and I didn't put everything in there, and I cut down the number of children she had, because the truth of the matter is, if I put every one of those experiences in there that she really had, people wouldn't believe it. Even though it's true, people wouldn't believe it. And I still have people that don't believe it, even when it's true. So it was very personal in that way. But if you read the book, you'll find that from the opening of the book, where she's the meanest woman I've ever known, to the very end of the book, it's a completely different tone. And the reason it's a different tone is because through this, it was more than cathartic. I figured out, at least in my own mind, who my grandmother was. I understood why she was so cold and why she was so the way she was. And so I no longer am angry at her. I'm no longer feeling hurt. But kind of an interesting story, family story. I have a cousin, Kathy, who is the child of my youngest She's the baby of the family. And she was my grandmother's favorite grandchild. And so my grandmother always had her with her, and she was always doing stuff with her. And I'm at a family reunion right before the book comes out, and my cousins are saying, "Oh my gosh, we heard you wrote a book about grandma." And I'm like, "Oh my God, who told you that?" I didn't even tell them, And so they want to know about how it all came about. And so I explained to them, I said, "Well, I've been kind of mad at grandma for 20, for my 40 years of life at this point, and I've been really angry with her, and I just needed, she wasn't very warm and thing." And they're all sitting there going, "Yes, yes, I get it." And my cousin Kathy's sitting next to me, the favorite grandchild. And I love her with all my heart. I would never deliberately hurt her. She's a beautiful woman. She wears a lot of makeup though. And she's sitting next to me, and all of a sudden I turn to her, and her makeup is melting down her face. I mean, she just black streaks going down her face, and I feel like I'm the most horrible person in the world. And I look at her and I'm like, "Kath, I am so sorry. Are you okay? I mean, I wouldn't hurt you." She goes, "No," she says, "that's okay." She says, "That's your story, but let me tell you my story." And she said, "You had the grandmother that was nobody, didn't want anything to do with you, but I was the kid whose mom and dad were too busy for me, and they dropped me off at my grandmother's house. And sometimes I was there for a few hours, but sometimes I was there for 3 weeks. And so she wasn't just my grandmother, she was also my parent. She made sure I got to my FFA things, and she made sure I got to my piano lessons and to my sporting events and my blah, 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 blah." So, and I never thought about it that way. It's like we both have different views of who she was, but that doesn't make one of us more right or one of us more wrong, because they were both a part of her. So I thought that, anyway, I got off on a tangent, but.
And Grace dropped this in chat. I love that this opened up ways to connect with your family and new understanding. Well, and just kind of springboarding off of a comment there, and I forgot about this because I remember, you telling me about how you told your cousin, the doctor, that you were writing this book, but you hadn't intended to write a book. So my question is that, so what came first, the writing or being a literary agent?
Oh, the writing first.
So tell us a little bit about, and again, like I said, it's you're not only a writer, you're also a literary agent. How did that come about? And can you kind of tell us a little bit about your career with that?
Sure. So actually that was kind of it's not something, being a literary agent isn't something that I ever actively thought about doing. I didn't realize, before you write, you don't really realize what all's out there. So I wrote The Edge of Nowhere. And while it was being published by a small publishing house, I was looking for an agent to publish Rome. And the reason I wanted an agent as opposed to going through a small publishing house is because agents, the only way to get your book in the hands of big publishers like Macmillan or Simon & Schuster or whatever is through a literary agent. They won't even look at your work without a literary agent. So I was looking for a literary agent, and I found my agent, and she was representing Rome, and we had gotten to talking many, many times, and she had lost one of her agents, and we were having a conversation, probably not even a professional conversation, it was more of a personal conversation at that point, because if you figured out anything about me, I can't ever stay on topic. And I said, that would be the coolest thing ever, to be a literary agent. I would love to do that someday. And she says, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, I think that's really cool." She says, "I can train you. If you're serious, I will train you in to be a literary agent, and you can work for us." And I was like, "Well, yeah." So that's how it started. So she trained me. I took some time training with her, and then started representing some clients. In the beginning, I was really doing more editing with her clients and stuff like that. So I wasn't actually representing my own. In the last year, I've started picking out more of my own clients, and I'm trying to build my list larger than it is. I think I have 4 clients right now, and I'd like to build it to a top of a maximum of 10. Some agents have 30 and 40 clients. I don't ever want to be that big, because I know myself, and I don't want things to drop through the hoops. But that's what it is. So basically, I search for manuscripts that speak to me, and then I take them on. If I need some editing, I work with the editing, and then I identify a list of editors from publishing houses that I think it will be a good fit for, and then I send out feelers to them and say, "Hey, look, I have this manuscript. I really think you'd like it. Would you take a look?" And they say yes or no. They usually say yes, they'll take a look, and then we kind of go from there. And if they like it, they take it. I'm still waiting for my first sale, because I've only just recently started building my list. But yeah, that's how it works. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
Do you have a specific genre that you represent? Are you specifically looking for YA or like women's fiction, or what do you think is your sweet spot for genre?
Well, I started out doing just young adult, and I like it, but I think anybody who reads the same kinds of things over and over again, sometimes it gets very tiring. It's not that the books aren't good, but you kind of lose your edge on them. So I recently started picking up some romance titles, and some women's fiction fun titles along the lines of Jennifer Weiner type books, not Jennifer Weiner, but her types of books, or those kinds. So
I love her writing. So we're coming up to the end of our session. So if folks have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We did have one question about book signings, and sounds like that's a great way to get feedback from your readers with that.
I love book signings.
Yeah. So, I mean, how have you been doing during this pandemic? I mean, obviously I've attended so many book events that are via Zoom. Are you missing getting out there? And
definitely, the whole publishing industry has been turned on its ear with this whole pandemic. So, and I feel for those authors who have books coming out or have had books coming out anytime during this period, because it makes it very difficult for them. So a lot of them are working with libraries and with bookstores to have virtual events where they kind of like what we're doing right here, virtual events. But in terms of real signing, I haven't had any because of the pandemic. A lot of authors are actually going to their local small bookstores, especially, and signing, a whole bunch of books that you can order literally directly from them. But yeah. Have I connected with the Boys and Girls Club? So many young people there who identify with the story. I have not connected with the Boys and Girls Club, but I should, and I think that's a really good idea. No, I have not, and so I should look into that. So thank you for the suggestion.
So what is next for you and your writing?
The
loaded question.
I just recently completed a new manuscript, and it's out on submission, which basically means that my agent is trying to sell it to a publishing house. And it's kind of different than anything, but I've written up to this point. But again, it always comes back to family, and that means family that you're given or family that you choose. And so the story is about a young woman who marries her high school sweetheart immediately out of high school. So it's the only thing she really knows. They've been married for about 10 years, and he is very emotionally manipulative. And after a series of events, she finally decides that she not only has to leave him, she needs to get as far away from him as she can. So she goes to Wyoming, where she finds her new family. And her new family is this very eccentric old woman who's in her 80s or older, who basically, she's like, she gives no what. She's like, she lives her life by her own rules. And she has a grandson who's an ex-cop, and he lives on her property, and he kind of caretakes. And so the girl, there's a romantic interest there. And then she has a grandson who is not only in a same-sex marriage, but the two gentlemen are drag queens, and they actually perform drag. And in the process of this young woman finding who she is, she finds herself through these people who are uniquely themselves. They're not putting on airs for anybody. They are who they are. And if you don't like that, maybe they're not the right people for you. But these people become her new family, and so that's what the story's about.
I will be thrilled to read that. So I'm really excited. As a thank you to our wonderful audience who has gone out on a limb and stuck with us as Wit, Wine, and Wisdom has gone virtual this year. We have a copy of Kathy's books, and I'm going to go ahead, and y'all see my fancy bowl here, going to pick out a name, and Kathy is going to sign it for you guys, and we'll get that in the mail to you. So hang on a second. Annie Schmidt. So Annie, we will go ahead and get your email address, or well, I'll email you, find out how you want these books to be signed, and then we'll get it to you. If anybody has any other questions, we still have a couple minutes, but otherwise I was going to share my screen again, which, as you all well know, that's going to trigger all of my issues with technology. That's why I went with a bowl. Anyway, So here, if you guys are interested in finding out what Kathy is up to, I know you are very prolific on the social media. You have a Twitter account, you're on Facebook, and I follow you on Instagram, and it's awesome. And it looks like, so there's your 2 standalones there, and is that a short story anthology, that Deja You?
Yes.
Very cool.
That was kind of a fun labor of love. 4 other authors and myself from my original publishing house got to be really close friends, and we decided it would be really fun to put together a book of short stories together and self-publish that. So that's what that's all about. And it was so much fun. It was a complete labor of love. It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's
And it
awesome.
follows.
And then, hold on again, technology. There we go. No, I'm sorry. So anyway, if anybody is interested to learn more about the foundation's programs or to donate, that top link will take you to the foundation website. And then also we do have a Valentine's Day auction that is going on right now. I just checked, there are fantastic items out there. Some of them involve coffee, which is one of my favorite things. And there's lots of goodies and there's a lot of donated items out there for perusal and would be perfect for a Valentine's Day present. And Brenda, that ends tomorrow, correct? Tomorrow by 10?
Yeah, it ends at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And you know, it doesn't have to be a Valentine for somebody else. It could be a Valentine for you.
Well, I was looking at that one mug and I said, I don't have enough. I think if you've been here all day, you've noticed that I've been drinking out of 3 different ones. So maybe I do have enough mugs. So, all right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for your attendance and for your questions and for just being a wonderful audience. We do have some more sessions coming up, so we hope to see you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, everyone.
It was wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Good. I will stop sharing my screen. I figure if I tell people that I'm going to screw up with the PowerPoint, they're gonna, be forgiving.
It's not, I think most people probably can imagine being in that situation.
Hope so. So what'd you think, Gloria?
Loved it. Absolutely loved it.
I gave her a grandchild on her 60th birthday, so she has to say nice things, FYI.
Very
I'm sure
cool.
she'd love it.
Just fantastic. Fantastic, Kathy. Thank you so much.
That was so much fun.
Thank you.
And,
It was
and I
fun.
wish, I think you and I could have gone for 2 hours. I love your stories.
Yeah.
I get a little caught up in my stories and I forget that
No, I think it was really smooth and it all went, flowed really nicely and it was entertaining and engaging. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So.
Well, when this is all over, I'm just saying we're either going to go to Susan Waftel's farm, Squash Blossom, or we're going to go ghost hunting with Hawk. We had a ghost hunter last
night. I'll go to Susan's farm. Yeah, no thanks.
I want to go ghost hunting.
So I know, right?
So last night, Gloria and Kathy, the last session that we had was a local woman who she's a spiritual consultant and she's a ghost hunter. And